The last thing my mother taught me before she passed was that a man will always show you his price, and that morning Preston set his down on a folded check and slid it across my sewing table like he was settling a bill he had forgotten to pay. I remember my hands most of all. They had threaded 1,000 needles without ever trembling, and now they went still over the seam I was pressing, the iron hissing a thin ribbon of steam into the quiet between us. He wore the navy suit I had taken in myself, the one I had let out at the shoulders back when his life first started growing bigger than his body. The check sat there on the pale muslin. I did not look at the number. I looked at his mouth, waiting for it to do the thing a mouth does right before it lies gently. Tamsin, he said, and my name in his mouth sounded like a receipt. Through the front window of my little shop on Delancey Street, a white car idled at the curb, and a woman sat in the passenger seat with her sunglasses pushed up into hair the color of port honey. She did not look at the shop. She looked at her phone. Preston followed my eyes and had the decency, or maybe the cowardice, to clear his throat. Her name is Whitney. The Ashfords. It is a different level, Tam. You understand levels. I understood levels. I had spent 4 years hemming mine up to reach his. I had emptied the savings account my mother left me into the deposit on his office downtown. I had sewn past midnight so his shirts looked like money he did not yet have, mended the elbows of his one good coat so no client would ever guess how close to the edge he stood. I had believed we were building something with 2 pairs of hands, and only now, watching that honey-haired woman check her reflection in his car window, did I understand that I had been the scaffolding, and scaffolding always comes down once the building can stand. I gave you my mother's money, I said. My voice did not shake. That surprised me more than anything. I know, he said, and he actually looked at the floor, which is where men look when they want you to think they have a conscience. I will pay it back. That is what the check is for. I did the math. It is fair. Fair. He had reduced 4 years and a dead woman's savings to a figure with a comma in it, and he called it fair. I set the iron upright so it would not scorch the cloth. I have always been careful with other people's things, even when I am breaking apart. I picked up the check then, not to keep it, but because I could not stand it lying on the fabric I was going to sell to someone who deserved a clean start. In the corner, in Boston gray, was the name of the bank it was drawn on. A name I did not recognize yet, a name I would come to know the full weight of before the season turned. Meridian Kessler Trust. I read it twice without knowing why my eyes caught there. Whitney's father does not like loose ends, Preston went on, filling my silence the way weak men do. So this makes us clean. No hard feelings. No hard feelings. I looked up at him, and I made myself see him the way a stranger would, this handsome, hollow man in a suit I had saved, standing in a shop I had built, telling me I was a loose end. Something in me that had been kneeling for 4 years quietly stood up. I did not cry. I want you to know that. I folded the check in half along a crease that was not mine, and I held it out to him, and I said, "Take your math with you." He blinked. He had prepared for tears, for begging, maybe even for a scene he could tell Whitney about later, and I had given him none of it. He took the check because his fingers did not know what else to do. Outside, the white car gave a short, impatient honk. He flinched toward the sound like a dog that has learned a new master, and I saw, in that flinch, everything I would spend the next months proving true. He paused at the door with his hand on my brass handle, the one I polished every Sunday. "You will land on your feet," he said. "You always do." Then the bell above the door rang the way it rang for every customer, cheerful and small, and he was gone into the white car, and the honey-haired woman did not turn her head as it pulled away. I stood in the steam and the quiet. I smoothed the muslin flat with both palms. And I did not yet know that the name I had read twice on that check belonged to a man who already knew mine, a man who had been carrying something of mine, folded and worn soft, for 6 long years. The invitation to the job came the way trouble often does, dressed as good fortune. A wedding planner with a headset and no time called my shop 2 weeks later and said the Ashford party needed a seamstress on site for a garden luncheon, someone discreet, someone fast, and my name had come up as the best hands on Delancey Street. I should have asked whose luncheon. I did not, because rent does not care about my pride, and because a small foolish part of me wanted to see whether I could stand in the same air as those people and still breathe. So on a bright Saturday I packed my kit, the good scissors, the folding pins, the tin of thread in 40 colors, and I took a bus to a lawn wider than my whole block, where white tents rose like sails and waiters carried trays of little glasses that caught the sun. I did not know it was Preston's engagement until I saw the honey-haired woman at the center of it all, and by then it was too late to be anywhere but there, kneeling in the grass at the hem of her dress while 200 strangers sipped and laughed above me. "Oh," Whitney said, looking down at the part in my hair. "It is you. Preston said you had a little shop." "A little shop." She said it the way you would say a little cough, something minor you hoped would clear up on its own. Her mother stood beside her in cream silk and did not look at me at all, which is its own kind of speech. The dress had caught on a heel and torn along the seam, and I threaded my needle right there on the lawn while the guests drifted closer, curious, the way people slow down for something on the side of the road. Careful, Whitney said, though my hands were the only careful thing for 50 feet. Then a waiter turned too fast and a glass of red wine tipped, and a dark bloom spread across the pale hem I was mending, and someone laughed, and Whitney made a small sound of disgust and said, loud enough for the nearest tables, well, at least she is on her knees already. Make yourself useful. The laughter that followed was not cruel the way a shout is cruel. It was worse. It was easy. It cost them nothing. I felt the heat climb my neck, and I kept my eyes on the cloth, because the cloth had never betrayed me, and I dabbed the stain from the outside in the way my mother taught me, cold water, patience, no rubbing, and I did not look up. Here is a thing I have learned about being shamed in public. It is quietest at the very center. All around me was noise, but inside the small circle of my own 2 hands the world had gone silent, and in that silence I heard my mother's voice telling me that dignity is not something they can take, it is only something you can put down, and I decided, kneeling in that grass, that I would not put it down for these people. Whitney pressed a folded bill into the pocket of my apron as if I were a valet. For your trouble, she said, and turned back to her guests. I finished the hem. I lifted the wine from the silk until only a ghost of it remained, a shadow no one but a seamstress would ever find. And when I finally sat back on my heels and looked up, past the shoes and the hems and the little glasses, I found that one man in all that crowd was not laughing. He stood apart at the edge of the lawn where the tents gave way to shade, a tall man in a charcoal suit with silver at his temples, older than Preston, still in the way deep water is still. He was not looking at the bride. He was looking at me. Not the way men look at a woman. The way a person looks at a face they are trying to place, turning it over behind their eyes, matching it against something old. Our eyes met for the length of one breath. He did not smile. He did not nod. He simply took me in, the kneeling, the thread, the tip in my apron I had not touched, and something moved behind his face and then was locked away. A younger man leaned to murmur in his ear, and he turned, and the crowd seemed to part for him without being asked, and I understood that whoever he was, this was a man other men made room for. I gathered my scissors and my tin of 40 colors. I left the folded bill on the grass beside Whitney's chair, because some money is heavier to carry than to refuse. And as the bus took me back down the hill toward Delancey Street, I could not stop seeing that stranger's face and the strange, still way he had looked at me, as though he already knew my name, as though he had been waiting a long time to find the woman who went with it. Work has a way of finding me even when hope has gone to bed early. Business had been thin since the luncheon, the way it always is when a person like Whitney mentions your little shop at the right tables, but on a gray Tuesday an envelope came by courier, heavy cream paper, my name written by an actual hand. Inside was a request for private tailoring at a residence up on Kavanaugh Ridge, a standing commission, the note said, discreet, well paid, a household that valued fine work and kept to itself. It was signed only with the name of the estate, Hawthorne House, and a sum for the first visit that made me sit down. I told myself I took it for the money, and the money was real, but the truth is that a person who has been made to feel small will drive a long way for a door that opens without a sneer behind it. So on a Thursday I climbed the ridge in my old station wagon with my kid on the seat beside me like a friend, and the road wound up through oaks until the trees opened onto a stone house that did not shout its wealth the way the Ashfords shouted theirs. It simply stood there, old and sure of itself, with tall windows and ivy gone bronze at the edges. I lifted the iron knocker and let it fall, and I braced myself for a butler, for that cool professional glance that measures your shoes. Instead, the great door swung inward on a small boy. He was maybe 7, with dark curls and a gap where a front tooth should be, and he wore pajama pants at 2 in the afternoon and a look of enormous concentration. He stared up at me. I stared down at him. And then his whole face broke open like a window thrown wide, and he said, in a bright rush, "You made my star coat." I did not understand him. "I am sorry, sweetheart," I said. "My coat," he said, and he grabbed my hand with both of his sticky ones and pulled me over the threshold before anyone could stop him, past a hall with a floor like a chessboard, to a bench where a child's wool coat lay folded. It was navy, small, worn soft at the cuffs, and it was not new, and I knew before he turned back the collar exactly what I would see there, because my hands had put it there. Inside the collar, in silver thread gone a little dull with washing, was a tiny North Star, 5 points, and beneath it 4 words I had stitched by lamplight for a child I never expected to meet again. "You are worth more." The rest of the line ran along the seam, more than anything owed. My throat closed. I sat down hard on the bench beside that coat because my knees had stopped consulting me. 6 years fell away. A cold church basement. A funeral I had wandered into by accident on a delivery. A family in pieces. A little boy of 1 who would not stop shivering because his coat had torn straight up the back and no one in all that grief had noticed. I had noticed. I always notice cloth. I had taken the coat quietly to a corner and mended it, and, because my heart could not fix the rest of what was wrong in that room, I had stitched a star inside it and the only promise I had to give. Then I had left before anyone learned my name. You remember, I whispered to the boy, though of course he could not. He had been a baby. Someone must have told him the story of the coat so many times that it became his own. They read it to me, he said proudly, confirming it, patting the collar. Uncle says it is the truest thing in the house. Uncle. Footsteps came then, unhurried, down the great stair, and I rose the way you rise when the ground itself has changed, and I looked up, and the tall man from the lawn was descending toward me in a charcoal shirt with his sleeves rolled to the forearm, silver at his temples. Still as deep water, and his eyes found the open collar in the boy's hands, and then found my face, and for the first time I saw something crack the stillness there. He stopped 3 steps from the bottom. Noah, he said quietly, without looking away from me, go find Rosa. The boy went, clutching his coat, and the man and I stood in that enormous quiet hall with 6 years and 4 stitched words between us, and I understood 2 things at once, the way you understand them in a dream. The first was that the door I had driven all this way to find had opened, truly opened, for the first time in a long time. The second was that I did not yet know this man's name, and that everything, was about to depend on it. His name was Roman Kessler, and I learned it the way you learn the depth of cold water, all at once and through the skin. He said it plainly, standing in that hall, the way a man says a name he is used to watching change people's faces. Mine must have changed, because the check was still fresh in my memory, the gray letters in the corner, Meridian Kessler Trust, and here that name was again, wearing a body, rolling its sleeves down over its forearms as if the sight of me had made it feel the need for armor. You are the seamstress from the Ridge Invitation, he said. It was not a question. And you are the man from the Ashford lawn. I did not know Hawthorne House was yours, I said. You did not know a great many things, he said, not unkindly, until about a minute ago. He offered me tea in a study lined with books that had clearly been read, and I sat, because my legs wanted it, and I watched him pour with hands that were steady the way mine were steady, careful with the cup, careful with the distance he kept. He told me almost nothing, and let me see almost everything, which I would come to understand was simply how he moved through the world. The commission was real, he said. No one needed clothes that fit a growing boy, and the boy had asked for the Star Lady from the day he could talk, and Roman Kessler was not a man who left a child's one wish unanswered when it walked up his own front steps. I should have felt warmed. Instead, a cold thread of fear was pulling tight in my chest, because I am not a fool, and a woman does not read a name on the check that pays her off, and then find that same name carved over the door of a mansion by accident. Mr. Kessler, I said. What is Preston Kane to you? He set down the teapot. For a moment he did not answer, and the fire ticked, and somewhere upstairs I could hear the boy laughing at something, that clean bright sound that has no idea what the adults below it are carrying. He is a man who owes me money, Roman said at last. Among other things. I did not sleep well after that first visit, and I slept worse after the second, because on my way down the ridge that evening a car I knew too well was waiting at the bottom, engine running. And Preston stepped out of it into my headlights, with his hands up like a man surrendering to a crime he had not been caught for yet. Tamsin, he said, coming to my window. God, Tamsin. What are you doing up there? My job, I said. The job you left me needing. You need to walk away from that house. His voice had a shake in it I had never heard, not in 4 years, not even the morning he left. You do not know what he is. You do not know what that name means. Then tell me. He looked back over his shoulder at the dark road as if the trees might be listening, and maybe they were, and he leaned close to my window and said the thing that would keep me awake for a week. Roman Kessler does not collect in cash, he said. When someone owes him something he cannot repay, he collects in people. Favors. Faces. Leverage. He finds the thing you care about, and he holds it until the debt is paid. His eyes searched mine, and I saw real terror in them, and something worse underneath the terror, guilt, old and buried and squirming now in the light. Do you understand what I am telling you? He did not hire you for a boy's coat. He hired you because you are the one thing left that ties back to me. You are not a seamstress up there, Tamsin. You are an installment. The white car honked once behind him, Whitney's shadow in the passenger seat, and he flinched toward it the way he always did, and I hated that flinch, and I hated more that his fear had climbed into me and made itself at home. Why would I be leverage against you, I said slowly, if you already threw me away for free? That stopped him. He had no answer, or he had one he did not dare say, and it sat in the space between us like a stone dropped in a well that never hits bottom. He got back in the car. The white car pulled away. And I sat there in the dark at the foot of Cavanaugh Ridge with my kid on the seat beside me, my hands, for once, not steady at all, caught between the coat in that house that had made a boy's face open like a window. And the warning ringing in my ears that the man who lived there had reached into my life on purpose, and that nothing I had lost had been an accident, and that the debt I had never signed for might be the biggest one of all. Fear is loud, but a sick child is louder, and 3 weeks into the commission the boy got a fever that settled the whole question of whether I should be in that house. I had come up to fit a winter coat, the real one this time, tailored to his small square shoulders, and Rosa met me at the door with her hands twisting her apron and worry all over her round kind face. Noah had spiked a temperature in the night, near 103 degrees, and the doctor had been and gone and said it was the kind of thing that has to burn itself out, plenty of fluids, cool cloths, patience. But Roman Kessler was a man who could buy anything except the ability to make his brother's son stop shaking, and it was breaking something in him that I do not think he knew still could break. I found him in the boys' room, a big man folded into a small chair, useless in the particular way strong men are useless in a sick room, holding a glass of water the boy would not drink. He will not take it from me, Roman said, and there was no power in his voice at all, just a father's plain helplessness wearing an uncle's name. Let me, I said. I did not ask permission again after that. I had nursed my mother through worse than a fever, and my hands knew what to do before my mind caught up. Cool cloth to the forehead and the back of the neck, small sips, the window cracked to move the air. Noah's curls were stuck to his hot skin and his eyes were glassy, but when I began, very softly, to hum the song my mother hummed over me when I burned with fever a lifetime ago, the boy went still, and then he drank 3 swallows, 4. And Roman Kessler watched from the small chair as if he were watching a magic trick he did not believe in and could not look away from. I sang low, and I did not stop. Hours went by that way. The light in the window went gold, then gray, then dark. Rosa brought soup no one ate. And somewhere in the deep middle of that night, when the fever finally broke and the boy's skin turned from fire to damp cool relief and his breathing dropped into the long even rhythm of real sleep, the man beside me finally spoke, and the dark loosened his tongue the way it does. His father used to sing to him, Roman said. My brother. Daniel. I kept my eyes on the boy so the man could keep his on the dark. Daniel was the good one. Everybody says that about the one who is gone, but with him it was true. He trusted people. He thought a handshake meant something. His voice was very even, and the evenness was the saddest part. A man he trusted took everything he had built and dressed the theft up in paperwork so clean it took me 2 years to prove it was a theft at all. By then Daniel was sick. You cannot prove your way out of what that kind of betrayal does to a man's heart. He was gone before the boy turned 2. I stopped humming. The room was so quiet I could hear the house settling around us. He left me this, Roman said, and I felt rather than saw him look at the sleeping child. And I have spent 6 years learning how to keep a promise to a dead man. I am not a soft person, Miss Reyes. I have done hard things to hold what is mine. But that boy asked for the Star Lady every night before he could spell his own name, and I told him, if she is real, I will find her. I did not expect her to walk up my steps carrying scissors. I looked at him then, this man the whole city made room for, sitting in a child's chair with his eyes wet in the dark and refusing to let the wet fall, and I felt the fear I had carried up that ridge for weeks change into something else. Something with more danger in it than fear, because fear you can run from. The man who ruined your brother, I said, very carefully, because a thread was pulling tight in me, and I did not yet see the whole pattern. Does he have a name? Roman turned his head and looked at me across the sleeping child, and for a long moment he weighed something, the way he weighed everything, and then he decided, and the name he said landed in that warm dark room like a stone through glass. It was a name I had emptied my mother's savings for. It was a name I had let out at the shoulders. It was the name that had slid a check across my sewing table and called 4 years' fare. And I sat there in the ruins of the sound of it, holding a cool cloth to a motherless boy's forehead, and I understood that the 2 great wounds of my life and his had been made by the very same hand. After that night the house stopped being a job and became a question I could not stop turning over, and Roman Kessler, who trusted no one, began, in his careful way, to trust me. He did not say so. Men like him never say so. He simply started leaving doors open that had been closed, and one rainy afternoon while no one napped he led me to the study and laid 3 things on the wide desk under the lamp, and told me he thought I had earned the right to see the shape of what I had walked into. The first was a photograph. A church basement, 6 years old, a family in black, and there at the edge, half turned from the camera, a younger Preston Kane in a borrowed suit with his hand on the shoulder of a dying man. Daniel. I recognized the room. I had stood in it. Somewhere just out of that frame a stranger seamstress was mending a baby's torn coat, and neither of us in that basement knew we were being bound together for the rest of our lives. The second thing was a ledger, and Roman opened it to a page he had clearly opened 1,000 times, and turned it so the lamp fell on a column of numbers and a single signature at the bottom, looping and confident, Preston's. This is how he did it, Roman said. Shell companies. Loans against loans. He moved my brother's money through paper so it looked like Daniel spent it himself. He is good at making a theft look like a choice the victim made. I heard my own voice ask, from very far away, may I see the dates? He let me turn the pages. I am a seamstress. I do not know finance. But I know how to follow a thread, and I followed this one back, page by page, year by year, until my fingers stopped on an entry that made the whole room tilt. There, folded into the same rotten column that had swallowed Daniel Kessler, in the same looping hand, on a date I would never forget because it was the week I signed over my mother's account to a man I loved, was a deposit in the exact amount I had given Preston for his office downtown. My money. My mother's money. It had never gone into any office. It had gone here, into this ledger, into the machine that dressed up robbery as choice, one more thin layer of clean paper over a dying man's stolen life. I sat down without deciding to. That is mine, I said. That number. That is my mother's savings. He told me it was a deposit on his office. It is in your brother's ledger. Roman went very still, stiller than I had ever seen him, and I watched him understand at the same instant I did, that the fraud that killed his brother and the betrayal that emptied my life were not two crimes, but one long crime with two victims who had finally sat down at the same desk. There is a third thing, he said quietly, and his voice had gone somewhere cold and level and frightening in its calm. He set down a heavy cream folder, the Ashford crest embossed on the front, the same crest I had knelt beneath on that lawn. Whitney Ashford's father did not build his fortune. He inherited a failing one and hired a clever advisor to make the numbers look alive again. The same advisor. The same paper. The wedding 2 weeks from now is not a love match, Miss Reyes. It is a merger. Preston Kane is marrying into the one family whose books he has been cooking because a man cannot be prosecuted by the people whose crimes he holds. He is not climbing a level. He is buying a wall to hide behind. The rain came harder against the tall windows. Upstairs a small boy slept under a mended coat, unaware that the men who broke his world were about to be pulled into the light. 2 weeks, I said. The wedding is in 2 weeks. Yes. And you have owned his every debt this whole time. I looked up at Roman Kessler, and the question I asked next surprised us both. Why have you waited? You could have ruined him years ago. You have had the ledger, the signature, the proof. Why wait 6 years? He was quiet for a long moment, the lamp carving his face into stone and shadow. Because ruining him would have been for me, he finally said. And I promised Daniel it would be for the boy. I was waiting for the right kind of daylight. I was waiting, and here he looked at me in a way that stopped my breath, for a reason that was clean. Then he closed the ledger, and slid the folder square with the edge of the desk, and said the thing that turned all my suspense into a single-held breath. The Ashfords have invited me to the wedding, he said, as a courtesy to a business associate. I think, Miss Reyes, that you should come with me. I think the whole room should learn who mended the coat. The night before we drove down to the wedding, Roman Kessler told me the truth about himself, and it turned out the truth was about me. We were in the study again, the coat between us on the desk, Noah's small navy coat with the star inside the collar, and I had assumed I understood its whole story, the baby, the basement, the stranger who mended it. I was wrong about one thing, and it was the thing that mattered. I need you to know how I found you, he said. He did not sit. He stood at the tall dark window with his back to me, and I understood he could only say it if he did not have to watch my face. 6 years ago I stood in that church basement, and I watched my brother die by inches in a folding chair, and I was so full of rage I could not see straight. There was nothing in that room I could fix. The lawyers could not fix it. My money could not fix it. And then I saw a woman I did not know kneel down in the corner with a baby nobody was watching, and take off her own scarf to keep him warm, and mend the tear in his coat with a needle she carried in her purse like other people carry keys. My hands had gone cold in my lap. I watched her stitch something into the collar, he said. I did not know what. She did not look up. She did not want anyone to see. She was not doing it to be thanked. She was doing it because a child was cold and she had hands. And then she was gone before I could cross the room, and I never learned her name, and in 6 years of hard nights, that is the one thing I could not stop seeing. Not the theft. Not the funeral. A stranger who gave a grieving family the only tenderness in the room and asked for nothing. He turned around then. When Noah could talk, He found the words in his collar and asked who wrote them. I read them to him. You are worth more than anything owed. And I made him a promise, and I made it to myself. If she is real, I will find her. He came around the desk slowly, and he turned the collar of the coat toward me under the lamp, the silver star, the 4 soft words, though we both knew them by heart now. Then a business matter took me to an Ashford lawn, he said, and I looked across 200 people at a woman kneeling in the grass, mending a hem while they laughed at her, taking nothing from anyone, and I felt the floor of 6 years drop out from under me. I told myself it could not be. Women who kneel to help are not so rare as I want to believe. So I did not trust it. I set a commission and I opened a door, and I let a child answer it, because a child would know the truth faster than I could reason my way to it. My eyes were wet now and I let them be. And he did, I said. He said, you made my star coat. He said, you made my star coat. Roman Kessler looked at me the way no one had looked at me in a very long time, not as a loose end, not as an installment, not as scaffolding, but as the answer to a question he had been carrying folded and worn soft against his chest for 6 years. You mended what my whole world could not, he said. The same week the same man was signing my brother's life away and stealing your mother's savings to do it. You and I were in the same room, Tamsin. We were being robbed by the same hand at the same hour, and in the middle of it you were the only person doing something kind. The clock ticked. The star gleamed. And the last piece of the pattern slid into place inside me, quiet and total, the way a seam finally lies flat. Preston Kane had not simply broken my heart. He had reached into 2 families' lives with the same pen, killed a man's brother and emptied a woman's savings and orphaned a boy and traded me for a wall to hide behind, and he had walked through 6 years believing that people were things you could spend. Tomorrow he marries his wall, I said. Tomorrow, Roman agreed, he learns the wall is mine. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. But something had settled in the room, patient and enormous, and I understood that the daylight he had waited 6 years for had finally come, and that I was not going to that wedding as anyone's leverage or anyone's guest. I was going as the woman who mended the coat. I was going as the truth walking in the front door. The Ashford wedding was the kind of event that measures itself in swans, and I walked into it on Roman Kessler's arm in a plain deep green dress I had made myself, and I felt every honey and cream head in that garden turn. Whitney saw me first. Her smile fell off her face and left something small and frightened underneath it. Preston saw me second, and I watched him understand, in stages, the way a man understands a floor giving way, that the woman he had called a loose end was standing beside the one man in the world he could not afford to owe. Roman did not hurry. He never hurried. He let the ceremony gather, let the guests be seated, let Preston stand at the front in a rented tuxedo sweating through the collar, and then, in the quiet moment before the vows, he simply rose from his seat in the second row, and the whole garden went still the way a room goes still when deep water stands up. Forgive the interruption, he said, and his voice was not loud, and that was what made 200 people lean in. I am a creditor of the groom. I find I can no longer extend him the courtesy of my silence. He set a leather folder on the small table where the rings waited. Every debt Preston Kane carries, I own. The loans behind this family's revival, the paper behind his career, the account he emptied from a woman named Reyes, the fortune he stole from my brother Daniel and dressed as a dead man's mistake. All of it. It comes due today. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He laid down document after document in the sunlight, and the sunlight did the work, and the guests, who understood money the way I understand thread, saw the pattern come clear, and one by one the Ashfords went pale. Whitney's father stood and sat back down when Roman looked at him. There was no violence in it. There was only consequence, arriving in daylight, patient and total. You have 2 ways to leave this garden, Roman told Preston, and now he was very quiet, almost gentle. As a man I pursue through every court in this state until there is nothing left of you, including your freedom. Or as a man who signs right now, in front of these witnesses, a true account of what he did to Daniel Kessler and to Tamsin Reyes. He set a pen on top of the confession. I have already decided which I prefer. The choice I am giving you is more than you gave either of them. I watched Preston's hand shake the way my hands had once refused to. I watched him look at Whitney and find nothing there. I watched him pick up the pen because his fingers, in the end, never knew what else to do, and sign his name to the truth in front of everyone who had ever laughed at me on that lawn. Then Roman Kessler turned to me, and the whole garden turned with him, and he took from his coat not a threat and not a ledger, but a single folded paper, and he opened it on the table beside the ruined wedding, and it was a marriage license, blank, waiting. This is not a summons, he said, low, for me and somehow for everyone. It is not leverage, and it is not a debt, and it is not a thing I am owed. He signed to erase what he owed. I am asking to sign something that makes you my equal, and only if you want it, and you may walk out of this garden free of every man in it, myself included, and I will still tear his world down for the boy exactly the same. The garden held its breath. And I understood, standing there in the dress I had made with my own 2 hands, that this was the moment the whole shape of my life had been bending toward. He had traded me for a richer bride to settle what he owed. And the man who owned his every debt was not buying me, not saving me, not collecting me. He was offering me a pen and calling it a choice. I picked it up. My hand did not shake at all. My mother told me a man will always show you his price, I said, loud enough for the swans. You are the first one who ever showed me my worth. And I signed. We did not marry in a garden full of swans. We married in the small walled garden behind Hawthorne House on a bright ordinary Saturday, with Rosa crying into her apron and a handful of people who had earned the right to be there, and no honey-haired crowd to laugh at anyone, and no wall to hide behind. Only an old stone bench and an apple tree and the kind of light that comes in the morning and asks nothing of you. I wore green again, because I had learned to like the woman who wore it. Noah carried the rings on a cushion he insisted on holding with both hands, and halfway down the short grass aisle he stopped, right in front of everyone, and looked up at me with those dark serious eyes and the gap where his tooth used to be, and he asked, in the loud clear voice children use for the biggest questions, "Are you my mom now?" And 200 swans could not have made me feel what that one small sentence made me feel. I knelt down in the grass, the way I had knelt on the Ashford lawn, except now I was kneeling because I chose to and not because I was made to, and I said, if you will have me, baby, I would be so proud. He thought about it with his whole face. Then he nodded once, like a man closing a deal, and took my hand in his sticky one and walked me the rest of the way, and I do not remember the vows as well as I remember that walk, because that walk was the vow. The season turned. Preston Kane's confession did what daylight does, and he left the state a small man in a story no one wanted to marry into, and the Ashford wall came down in a courtroom, quietly, the way Roman did everything, and I found I did not need to watch it fall. Justice, I learned, is a quick thing. It arrives, it is true, it is over. What takes the time, what takes the rest of your life, is the healing, and that is the part worth staying for. Roman changed in the healing more than he ever changed in the ruining. The stillness in him began to warm at the edges. He learned to sit on the floor of the boys' room and be terrible at the games and love them anyway. He learned that a man can be powerful and gentle in the same breath, that the two were never opposites, that his brother had known it all along. And I watched the hardness he had built over 6 years of keeping a promise soften into the softer, harder work of simply being a father, and I loved him for the trying more than I ever could have loved him for the winning. As for me, I did not close my little shop on Delancey Street. I could have. There was money enough now that I would never again empty an account for a man who called it fair. But a shop is not a thing you keep for money. So instead, I turned it into something my mother would have recognized. I took in girls and boys the county had given up on, the ones aging out of foster homes with a trash bag of clothes and no one to teach them a trade, and I taught them what my mother taught me, cold water and patience and no rubbing, how to mend a seam, how to make a thing last, how to fix what other people throw away. Over the door I hung a wooden sign of foster boy carved crooked and proud, and it did not say the name of the shop. It said 4 words. Worth is not a number. On the good mornings, and there are so many good mornings now, Noah comes down to the workshop after school and sits on the high stool and threads needles for the older kids and tells them, with enormous authority, the story of a star sewn into a coat by a lady nobody knew, in a cold room, for a baby nobody was watching. He tells it as if it is a legend. To him it is. And sometimes, when the light is coming in gold across the cutting table and the machines are humming and a child who arrived with nothing is bent over a seam learning that their hands are worth something, I catch Roman standing in the doorway the way he used to stand at the edge of rooms, still as deep water, watching. But he does not lock anything away behind his face anymore. He just watches his family and lets it be seen on him, all of it. My mother told me a man will always show you his price. She was right, and she was not wrong to warn me, because most of them will. But she never got to tell me the other half, so I am telling it to the children who thread my needles, and I am telling it to you. A person's worth was never a price at all. It cannot be traded. It cannot be emptied from an account or signed away on a check or laughed at on a lawn. It is stitched into you, small and silver and permanent, in a place the world does not think to look, and it says the truest thing there is, that you are worth more than anything owed. Mornings always come, and the star is always there, whether anyone sees it or not.